Okay, my name is Afaa. That's my African name given to me by Tesson Wayne, my good friend. My full name is Afaa Michael Weaver. I was born Michael Sean Weaver. And in the Chinese community, I have the name Hui Yafeng. And I like to read a poem by Lucille Clifton, who was very important to me when I was very young. My dream about God. He is wearing my grandfather's hat. He is taller than my last uncle. When he sits to listen, he leans forward, tilting the chair, where his chin cups in my father's hand. It is swollen and hard from creation. His fingers drum on his knee, Dad's stern tattoo. And who do I dream I am, accepting his attentions? I am the good daughter who stays at home, singing and sewing. When I whisper, he strains to hear me, and he does whatever I say. And I just love the irony and the feminist rewriting and subversion there that's so consistent in the poem. I was 23 years old when I met Lucille. It was the winter of 1974 to 75, and she was giving a reading in Baltimore at a branch of the Enoch Pratt Public Library, one of the branches, not the main branch downtown. A friend took me because I was writing poetry then. She said, I know Lucille, and I want to introduce you to Lucille. And that was the beginning, 1974 to 75, that winter. And sometimes I call Lucille on the phone. I said, Lucille, I wrote a poem. Want to hear it? And she would say, sure, Michael, read your poem. And I read the poem. She said, Michael, that is so good. You just keep writing. And I had dropped out of the university when I was 18. I started when I was 16, much too young. And I was worried about finishing up my bachelor's in English, so I talked to Lucille. I said, Lucille, do you really think I should worry about this? She said, Michael, you just keep writing poetry. Don't worry about that degree. I said, okay, Lucille. And sometimes I drive her to her poetry readings. In 1977, I believe it was, or 76, I was 25, so it would be 1976. And she was reading in Washington, D.C. at the Martin Luther King Memorial Library. And she told me stories all along the way. And she said to me, we were going down the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, which I call Shirley Highway. And she said, Michael, you're 25 years old now. I can tell you grown-up stories. And she told me a grown-up story, and I laughed going down to Washington. But that was Lucille. And the kids, they were babies then. They hardly remember this. But she'd tell me stories about them. And she said she'd write poems in the kitchen, and one of the kids would be on her lap, and she'd be writing there on the table. Another one would be pulling pots and things out of the closet cabinet. Another one scooting across the floor. She said, Michael, that's how I write. And I think that, well, not think, I know. At this point, I'm 60 years old. I'm much older than Lucille was when I met her. She was in her late 30s, early 40s or so. And I realize now how influence works in poetry, because Lucille was working with full consciousness of her childhood, her challenges in childhood, and I wasn't. But the influence of being around her and having her frame a lot of my poetic sensibility, even in the subtle ways that she did, I realize now how impactful that was on my work. And my very first collection of poetry, Water Song, the title poem in that collection, Water Song, came about when Lucille explained projective verse and free association to me. She gave me a copy of, she told me, well, she gave me the copy, An Introduction to Poetry by X.J. Kennedy, which I use in workshops sometimes now. But she said, Michael, think of the breath in the line as an exhalation, and read Charles Olson. Lucille did that. And she also said to me, she said, I want you to, she said, experiment with this associative thinking in your writing. And so those long looping lines with the positive frames of reference in Water Song comes as a result of being around Lucille when I was very young, in my late 20s. And, uh, and she said, "Now, Michael, sit down at the typewriter and just put your fingers on the keys lightly and go." And that's how I wrote Water Song. So at this point in my life, I'm 60, as I said now, and rather proud of that. It's an accomplishment for a black man, especially from East Baltimore. But looking back, I understand how influence works. You know, influence works psychically and all the levels too. But when you're a young poet, you aren't really aware of that. And it takes getting older to understand that, at least for me. Um, but just so great to sit here and think about Lucille and remember her that way. I think I'll read a poem of my own now. And this is a poem from my ekphrastic project, and I did a book 20 years ago. I was working for the New Jersey State Arts Council, and during the lunch break when I wasn't teaching poetry to the kids, I was writing poems about Marc Chagall's paintings. The book is called Stations in a Dream, and each poem in the book is to a poem in a painting in his collection. It's retrospective that premiered in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 1985, just a few months before he passed away. And this is a painting of his self-portrait. And the poem is to the painting, to the figure in the painting, which we might assume is Marc Chagall, but we don't really know. Self-portrait. I see myself in the shadows of a leaf, compressed to the green blades growing to a point like the shards of miles of mirrors, falling and cracking to perfect gardens. I never inspect the withered assumption of my face's petty dialogue in raindrops, the deceptive spreading of the words oozing from the skin to the edges of water etched on the ground by gravity and wishing. Passing for the seriousness of my eye, platitudes of my white collar, or the perfect posture of my lips, it skirts from the leaves of the plant hiding me and sits stoic like stone in my pupil, mute and unassuming like Rashi. To gather myself, I will swim naked in the wind, bending my blind elbows in circles, stopping now to dance like the cherubic gold on the ark, and gather myself from the particles of this excitement, another structure, one closely resembling the beginning. And that's to the painting by Marc Chagall by the same title. It's a rather intriguing question. And, these prints, these cards are lovely. This is written on top of a bridge, which I think is appropriate. And the question on top of the bridge is, who in your life should be a poet? Well. Two people. My son and my brother, both of whom can write poetry, both of whom have written poetry. First, I'll talk about my brother. His name is Mark. My mother named all five of us with M's. I'm Michael, and there's Mark, Marv, or Marley, Michelle. Mark is writing poetry, and he lives in Texas with my sister Marva, and he sends me his poems in email. And he's studying for his bachelor's degree in science and math at the University of Texas in Dallas. So I said to him a couple of weeks ago, I said, "Mark, why don't we have a telephone workshop around this one poem that he was working on?" So I said, "Let's set a time. You call me, set your laptop up because I'm going to send you to some websites and so on." So we talked about that poem, and I think that helped him. I'm trying to steer him into the writing program, at least for one course in the fall at UT Dallas. And I contacted one of the professors there and asked her if she would reach out to him. She agreed, and so I'm trying to get him into her workshop. I think he has a good deal of talent, and what really warms my heart for both of them, thinking that both of them can write. I have to work a little harder on my son because there's a father-son resistance there, But is the fact of knowing where we came from. We came from East Baltimore. And I tell people it's a rough place, but you have no idea unless you really understand what that's like. And to think that they have these, what I do say is, your talent for whatever it is, carpentry, fixing cars, whatever your talent is. My belief is that God gave it to you. And so these gifts, the ability to write poetry, to develop their sensibility and their minds that way, is an opportunity for them. And I think, you know, I, you know, I would be very happy to see both of them published, to see both of them be published poets. I would. And, it's, it's the hope, the ability to engage your emotional world, the ability to make good use of those gifts. And I'm thinking, when I say make good use, I'm thinking about the story of the 10 talents. You're given this gift, and you're also given challenges. You can't just use the gift. There's a price you have to pay by living your life. And but the reward is so great. The reward is so great. And for Black men, um, for us to be able, if I can talk about Black men for just a moment here as Black men, for us to be able to negotiate that emotional space, that sensitivity, without feeling that we're giving up something of our masculinity is a big challenge for us, because there's a cultural imprint for African Americans. I would say for Black folk and other communities too. I would say especially, if I can take this moment now to say that I have friends from Jamaica. Jamaican men have a really high regard for very, very staunch and masculinity. But I think there's a space for us to grow and to enlarge the idea of who we are as men. And so I'm just really happy to think that there's that opportunity for my son and my brother. And I think my brother and I are going to have another telephone workshop. I'm going to have to reel him in on this one particular poem that I want him to sort of focus on his emotions around. My son, I have to send messengers to him because I can't see, we don't do well with direct engagement, and I have to give him that space. But I believe in the energetic connections that we all have. And there's a reference. Now, this may not sound like it has anything to do with what I'm talking about, but it does. I was watching a TED.com presentation by a neurologist from Harvard, Jill Bolt is her name. And Dr. Bolt Taylor, I believe is her last name, had a stroke. And she was 39 years old, working at Harvard. But the gift to all of us in that experience of hers is that she recorded that as a scientist. And so as it was happening to her, she made note of it. And she gave this presentation on TED.com where she talked about the essence of humanity as being an energetic one. How we are all, regardless of our external markers for identification, we're all entities of energy. We're connected by this huge intelligence. And I think that by giving expression to that energy, by saying, well, I hope this for my brother, I hope this for my son, it engages that energetic field and it gets back to them, it gets back to other people. You could call that faith. I would stay away from religious designations, but you can call it faith. I'm thinking in terms of science. My son and my brother, and I think about East Baltimore, and I think about the toughness of the place, Milton Avenue, which is like a demilitarized zone. It's a tough place, but it's a good foundation. It's a very good foundation if you can build an artistic life out of that. The jazz musician Cyrus Chestnut came from East Baltimore, but it's that hope I have for them, that celebration to know that they have that ability. And they're both very intelligent young men, and it gives me great pleasure to think that way about them. forgot.